The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly, filled with the quiet hum of stellar winds and the soft glow of distant stars. For the Zinkari, a race of conquerors and visionaries, this silence was a reminder of their dominance. Their empire spanned over 1,000 worlds, each conquered through relentless warfare, cunning strategies, and unparalleled technological superiority. Across the galaxy, their name was feared and respected. No race had ever stood against them and survived for long. For centuries, the Zinkari had viewed the humans, Terrans, as little more than an amusing if dangerous anomaly. Their early attempts at interstellar travel had been clumsy and ineffective. Their ships were slow, their weapons crude. They had barely survived their first encounters with the alien fleets. And in the eyes of the Zinkari, they were nothing more than a blip on the radar of galactic history. It had been assumed that, given time, the Terrans would either fade into obscurity or be crushed under boot of galactic dominance. But the Zinkari had underestimated humanity. It started with an anomaly, a massive object appearing suddenly on the edge of Zinkari-controlled space. At first, the sensors didn't even pick up anything at all. The ship was cloaked, defying the very laws of detection. The Zinkari fleet, one of the most advanced in the galaxy, tried everything: energy scans, radar pulses, gravitational waves. Nothing. It was as if the ship didn't exist at all. "Bring me the results again," growled Admiral Derricks, his voice a low, throaty hiss as he stood before the war room's massive display, flicking through holographic data feeds. The officers at their stations exchanged confused glances. How could something this large simply vanish from the sensors? Finally, one officer spoke, his voice trembling. "Sir, the object has appeared. Out of nowhere." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Explain." A second officer quickly keyed in commands, bringing the image of the massive ship onto the central display. The warship was enormous, nearly 15 times the size of a standard Zinkari battleship. Its surface was blackened, jagged, almost alive with the energy pulsating from within its hull. It resembled no design the Zinkari had ever encountered, and yet the feel of the ship seemed disturbingly familiar, like a nightmare they couldn't shake. "Scan it." Full spectrum. "Now," the Admiral ordered. Moments later, the officers stared at the screen, their faces pale, their hearts sinking. The readings were incomprehensible. Nothing in their databanks could identify the ship's structure, nor the energy signatures emanating from it. No known alloy or material existed that could match its properties. This is impossible," one of the officers whispered, his hands shaking as he tried to make sense of the data. A voice broke the silence. Could it be Terran? The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of disbelief. The Terrans, humans, had never even approached the Zinkari's technological level, let alone surpassed it. Their ships, crude and outdated, were no match for Zinkari firepower. But here before them was a ship that should not exist, something that defied every known law of science, a ship that came from the very species they had written off as insignificant. The Zinkari had once thought themselves infallible. They were the apex of galactic evolution, possessing technology so advanced that most civilizations couldn't even fathom it. Their ships could warp space itself, create singularities with a thought, and crush entire fleets with a flick of their powerful weapons. But this Terran warship, it was different. The Terran warship moved silently through space, its engines a quiet hum that seemed to disturb the fabric of the cosmos itself. It was as if it was not only defying physics, but mocking them. As the Zinkari fleet tried to analyze the warship further, more unsettling revelations began to surface. It was moving faster than their sensors could track, slipping in and out of their detection range, as if it were an apparition. A fleet of the Zinkari's best ships, each equipped with the finest weapons and shielding, was dispatched immediately to engage the warship, but they were unaware that this was no simple skirmish. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything the Zinkari had ever experienced. When the Zinkari ships dropped out of warp and approached the Terran warship, they expected a simple, perhaps even humiliating victory. Their weapons, finely tuned for maximum destruction, would overwhelm this strange ship, and soon they could go back to their plans of galactic domination. They had no idea that they were about to face something far worse than they ever anticipated. The Terran warship, without warning, unleashed its first salvo. A massive beam of energy struck the leading Zincari vessel, disintegrating it in an instant. The Zincari admiral watched in stunned disbelief as his fleet's most powerful vessel was reduced to nothing more than atomic ash. The energy pulsed so intense that even the surrounding void seemed to shudder. "Report." The Rix barked, his voice trembling now. His confidence had been shattered. Shields failing, power unstable. The officer's words came out in panicked gasps. Before they could react, the warship fired again, and this time, a blistering railgun round tore through the hull of the second ship, sending it spiraling into the void, the entire structure coming apart with horrifying speed. And then, the Terran warship did something that made the Zincari fleet's commanders freeze in shock. It didn't pursue them. It didn't engage further. It merely hovered, an impossible ship in an impossible position, defying every rule of warfare. In the quiet that followed, the Zincari fleet was left reeling. How had this happened? How had the Terrans, this species that should never have been capable of such a thing, destroyed their ships so effortlessly? And yet, the worst was yet to come. The Terran commander, whose face had been hidden behind a veil of secrecy until now, broadcast a message to the alien fleet. His voice was calm, measured, and undeniably human. "This warship exists because humanity does not bow to you. We do not fall into the shadows of your empire. We are not weak. You have underestimated us for far too long." The words were simple, but they carried with them the weight of a promise that the Terrans would not be pushed aside. They would not simply survive in this galaxy. They would make their mark, and the Zincari would never forget it. In that moment, something shifted. The warship wasn't just a vessel of destruction. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance, a defiance that sent ripples of fear to the alien species that had once believed themselves invincible. The Terran warship shouldn't exist. But now, the galaxy would have to reckon with the truth. Humanity was not the underdog anymore. The silence in the Zincari war room was deafening as Admiral Derricks watched the holographic projections flicker in front of him. His mind raced, grappling with the enormity of the situation. The Terran warship was still in their system, its presence a stain on the Zincari pride, and it seemed unyielding, unmoving, as though it was daring them to take another step, to make another attempt at its destruction. His officers were in full panic mode, some nervously running diagnostics, others trying to contact their fleet, only to discover that their communications were being jammed by an unknown source. The warship's mere presence had already begun to disrupt their systems. The Zincari had never faced anything like this. They had witnessed weaponized ships before, ships capable of annihilating entire fleets, but nothing that could challenge their superiority so utterly, so effortlessly. "Activate the fleet," Derricks barked, his voice commanding despite the undercurrent of fear that seeped into his tone. "All ships, prepare for immediate engagement." For a brief moment, it seemed like the Zincari might reclaim control. They had the numbers, the firepower, but something was wrong. The Terran warship, which had previously been silent, suddenly shifted its position, as if mocking their movements. Its systems flickered to life in a terrifying display of precision and purpose. With no warning, it launched a counterattack. The first blast was a dissonant chord that shattered the stillness of space. The beam struck the lead Zincari destroyer with pinpoint accuracy, piercing its forward shields like they were made of paper. The ship crumpled on itself, its massive frame folding into a fiery explosion. Within seconds, there was nothing left but a cloud of debris, no escape pods, no survivors. "Impossible!" One of the officers shouted in disbelief. "Their weapons are too powerful." But Derricks wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the Terran warship as it moved with fluid grace, despite its gargantuan size. It was alive somehow, as though its movements were more instinct than calculation. Every motion of the ship, each twist, each shift, seemed deliberate, as though it were toying with the Zincari forces. Then, without warning, a new weapon activated. The warship's outer hull flared with a bright blue glow, sending ripples of energy through space itself. A second energy blast shot forward, but this time it wasn't just a beam. It was a burst of concussive force, spreading outwards in all directions, vaporizing another Zincari ship before the crew could even react. The shockwave reverberated through the nearby vessels, crippling their engines and disabling their weapons. "What is that?" one officer gasped, clutching his console as the hull groaned under the pressure. "It's not possible," muttered another. "Their technology, it defies everything we know. The materials, the energy outputs. This isn't just another warship. It's something else entirely." The Zinkari fleet, once the pinnacle of galactic military might, was being dismantled with terrifying precision. But it wasn't just the firepower of the Terran ship that shook the Zinkari to their core. It was the way it used its technology. Each attack, each movement, seemed too advanced, too sophisticated, to come from a species that, until now, had barely scraped by in the eyes of the galaxy. The Terran Warship wasn't just a product of human engineering. It was a revelation. Meanwhile, aboard the warship itself, Captain Elise Vega, the Terran commander, stood motionless in the center of the command deck, her eyes focused on the holographic projections of the battle unfolding before her. Despite the chaos of the ongoing battle, she was calm, her every decision surgical and precise. Her mind was a stark contrast to the panic that had engulfed the Zinkari command center. She knew that the warship was no ordinary vessel. It had been years in the making, a secret project that had pushed the boundaries of what humanity believed possible. It was a culmination of decades of research, reverse-engineered alien technology, and unparalleled drive to ensure that Earth would never be at the mercy of invaders again. "Captain, their fleet is breaking apart." Lieutenant Ramirez called out from the weapons console, his voice crackling through the comms. "We've taken down 3 destroyers, and their remaining ships are scattering." Vega nodded, her expression unreadable. "Do not pursue them. Let them retreat." The crew exchanged surprised glances, but they followed her command without question. It wasn't the Terran way to chase a beaten enemy. They were not barbarians. They had made their point. The Terran warship, code-named Vengeance, was not just a weapon. It was a symbol, a message to anyone who would dare to challenge humanity again. As the Zinkari fleet began to pull back, Captain Vega allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The ship's power, its devastating weapons, were only part of the equation. The real advantage they had was the integration of technologies from across the galaxy, alien tech, scavenged remnants of ancient civilizations, and cutting-edge human innovation, all woven together into an unrecognizable, formidable force. The warship's outer armor was composed of an experimental alloy, one forged from a rare metal that had been discovered in the wreckage of a long-dead civilization. The Zinkari, upon analyzing it, would realize that the material shouldn't even exist. It absorbed energy, it reflected it, it dispersed it. Their sensors couldn't get a lock on it. It was as though the very fabric of the ship were shifting in real time, rendering traditional scanning methods useless. The ship's propulsion systems were powered by a combination of quantum thrusters and a newly discovered form of zero-point energy harvested from the vacuum of space itself. The result? A ship that could bend the laws of physics, moving faster than light when necessary, while maintaining near-perfect control. And then there were the weapons, weaponry that seemed to manipulate the very fabric of space-time. Railguns, yes, but not the kind the Zinkari were familiar with. These railguns could fire projectiles at relativistic speeds, turning them into weapons of mass destruction. But even more devastating were the disruptor beams, which worked on a principle the Zinkari could not even begin to understand. They didn't just damage the target. They phased through it, erasing the very matter the ship was made of, leaving behind nothing but empty space. As the last of the Zinkari ships limped out of the system, battered and broken, Captain Vega knew that this was only the beginning. The Terran warship was just a single piece of the puzzle. It was a beacon, a signal to the rest of the galaxy that humanity was not to be trifled with. And the Zinkari were the first to learn that lesson the hard way. The technology behind the Vengeance was a mystery that would haunt the galaxy for years to come. How had humanity acquired such knowledge? How had they bypassed the centuries of galactic evolution that had led to the rise of races like the Zinkari? It was a question that would gnaw at the alien mind, a question that would drive them to seek the Terrans out, to unravel their secrets. But they were already too late. The Terrans were no longer the underdogs. They were no longer the naive, powerless species that once cowered before alien powers. Humanity had ascended. Back at the Zincari Command Center, Admiral Durix was pacing furiously, trying to make sense of it all. The Zincari had never felt fear before, not real fear. They were a species built on conquest, bred for battle, and hardened by centuries of dominance. But now, as the Terran Warship Vengeance loomed large in their system, a deep, primal dread began to take root in their hearts. It was a feeling unfamiliar and unwelcome, but it was undeniable. The Vengeance wasn't just a warship. It was a challenge, a declaration, and, most terrifying of all, an enigma. The defeat had been swift and brutal. The Zincari had watched helplessly as their once mighty fleet was torn apart by a single ship, a ship that should have never existed. The humans, Terrans, had always been seen as primitive, barely capable of surviving beyond their own world. Now, the Terrans had shattered that illusion, sending a clear message to the galaxy. We are no longer weak. Admiral Durix sat at the head of the Zincari War Council, his mind a swirl of chaos. The fleet had retreated to a nearby star system, hidden in the dark shadows of a massive nebula, where they could regroup and reassess the situation. His ship, the flagship Ravager, had barely escaped with hull intact. He could still feel the sting of humiliation. He had never believed that the Terrans could pose such a threat, but now he knew the truth. They were a force to be reckoned with. We were wrong. Durix's voice was a low growl as he looked around to gathered council members. The Terrans are not the weaklings we thought them to be. That warship, that ship should not exist. One of the council members, a high-ranking strategist named Zarnak, spoke up, his voice shaking with a mixture of frustration and fear. How could they have built such a ship? The Terrans had nothing. We've been watching them for centuries. They were nothing but a nuisance, and now they are not a nuisance anymore. Durix interrupted, his eyes burning with a cold fury. That ship is a weapon of unimaginable power. If we do not act quickly, the entire galaxy will change. The Terrans will become a threat to us all. Zarnak looked down at his datapad, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to make sense of the ship's capabilities. We've analyzed the wreckage of the ships they destroyed. We cannot comprehend the technology they used. The energy output, the weaponry, the propulsion systems, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. It defies our understanding of physics. The Vengeance was alive somehow. It bent space itself. I don't know how it works, but I believe the Terrans understand something we do not. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, and Durix slammed his fist on the table. That's the problem. We've underestimated them for too long. We cannot afford to keep making that mistake. The Vengeance is a weapon, yes, but it's also a symbol, a message to the galaxy that the Terrans are no longer the prey. They are the predators. Zarnak nodded grimly. Then what do? We've lost our fleet. The Terrans have proved that they can destroy us with ease. We can't fight them with conventional tactics. No, Durix agreed. We need to think differently. We can't fight fire with fire. We'll never match them in sheer firepower. We must outthink them. As the Zincari leadership scrambled to devise a strategy, the Terrans were already one step ahead. On board the Vengeance, Captain Elise Vega stood in command center, her arms crossed, staring out at the stars. The quiet hum of the warship systems was a constant, comforting presence. She was a veteran, someone who had fought in countless campaigns. But even she felt the weight of this moment. The Vengeance was a force like no other. It had crushed an entire fleet with ease. But this wasn't about military victory. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Captain! Lieutenant Ramirez's voice crackled over the comms. We've received new intelligence from our scouts. The Zincari are regrouping. They're planning something. I can feel it. They're desperate. Vega turned to face him, her expression unwavering. We've already won the first round. They know it. We know it. The question is, what do they do now? They'll come after us again, Ramirez said. They won't let this slide. They'll send everything they've got. Vega nodded slowly, her lips curling into a tight smile. Let them come. But this time we'll be ready. The Zincari fleet began to rebuild in secret, their ships patching themselves together, their crews training for the inevitable next encounter. But there was no immediate rush. In the face of the Vengeance, The Zinkari were no longer the aggressors. For the first time in centuries, they found themselves on the defensive. They knew their enemies would come again, but they also knew that they had no choice but to prepare differently. The galaxy had changed, and so too must their strategies. Zarnak, the strategist, spent days analyzing every piece of data they had gathered from the Terran Warship, trying to find some weakness, any flaw that could be exploited. He studied the wreckage of the destroyed ships, the readings from their battle sensors, and the reports of surviving crew members. But the more he studied, the more he realized just how far behind they were. Their weapons are not just destructive. They are designed to overwhelm us at every level, Zarnak muttered, his voice filled with frustration. We've never seen anything like this. But it's clear now that brute force won't work. Admiral Durix, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the discussions, finally spoke, his voice cold and calculating. Then we need to get inside their minds. We need to understand their strategy, their tactics. We must think like them. Zarnak looked up, a glint of realization in his eyes. You're suggesting we infiltrate them, sabotage them from within. Yes, Durix said, his eyes narrowing. We cannot afford another defeat. We must infiltrate the Terran ranks, find out what makes their warship tick. We must find a way to cripple them from the inside out. While the Zinkari were formulating their plans, Captain Vega continued to prepare her crew for whatever would come next. The Terrans had already proven themselves superior in battle, but Vega knew that the Zinkari were not to be underestimated. The alien species would not back down quietly. They were dangerous, and they would find a way to strike back. But Vega had something they didn't. Humanity. The Terrans had always been scrappy, inventive, and relentless in the face of adversity. For centuries, they had been pushed to the brink of extinction, but each time they had fought back harder. Now, with a vengeance as their symbol, humanity stood ready to defend their place in the galaxy. And the Zinkari would learn the hard way that they had underestimated the power of the Terran spirit. Vega turned to her crew, her face hard with resolve. This is our fight now, she said, her voice filled with determination. We don't fight for the past. We fight for the future. And we fight together. Let the Zinkari come. The vengeance hung in the cold void of space like a dark monolith, its massive hull gleaming with an eerie, otherworldly light. Captain Elise Vega stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the starfield ahead, her mind already preparing for what would come next. The Zinkari had regrouped. They had learned from their defeat, and now they were coming for revenge. But Vega wasn't worried. Humanity had faced the impossible before and triumphed. The vengeance was humanity's weapon of defiance, and no fleet, no matter how powerful, could break them. Captain. Lieutenant Ramirez's voice interrupted her thoughts, his tone filled with a mixture of urgency and determination. The Zinkari are gathering their forces. They're ready for a full assault. They're coming. Vega's lips curled into a tight smile. Let them come. She turned to face her bridge crew, her eyes scanning their faces, each one steeled for the battle ahead. This is it. This is the moment that defines us. We've shown the galaxy that we're not just survivors. We're fighters. And now we finish what we started. We're not running. We're not hiding. We stand our ground. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's first victory had spread like wildfire. The defeat of the Zinkari fleet had shaken the entire galactic order to its core. For centuries, the Zinkari had been the undisputed rulers of the stars, their dominance unchallenged. But now, a new player had entered the arena, one that none of the other species had expected, one that had been dismissed and underestimated for too long. And the Terrans weren't just surviving, they were rising. In the highest councils of the galaxy's other powers, debates raged about the sudden appearance of humanity's warship. How had they built it? Where had they acquired such advanced technology? The Zinkari had been caught off guard by the vengeance, but the rest of the galaxy was now watching with wary eyes. Would humanity be content with their victory? Or would they continue to push forward, spreading their influence across the stars? Some species saw this as a chance to align with the Terrans, hoping to secure an alliance before they grew too powerful. Others, however, began to whisper in the dark corners of the galaxy, fearful that the Terrans would not stop with just the Zincari. What if they decided to expand, to conquer, to turn their newfound power into an empire? But there was no question in Captain Vega's mind. Humanity had no desire to conquer the galaxy. They had no need for empire building. All they wanted was respect. They wanted to be treated as equals. They wanted to prove that they had a place among the stars. The Zincari fleet, battered but not broken, re-entered the system. Their ships were larger now, reinforced, and bolstered by the latest in their formidable technology. But they were also desperate. The humiliation they had suffered at the hands of the Terran Warship had shaken their very foundation. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. Admiral Derricks, his face a mask of determination and rage, surveyed the fleet's readiness from his flagship. We strike now. We strike hard. We will not retreat again. This time we will destroy them. His fleet moved in formation, their weapons primed, their shields activated. The Zincari were ready for war. But as the Vengeance moved into position to intercept them, Derricks's fleet hesitated. The warship's presence was overwhelming, its power so immense that it seemed to distort the very fabric of space around it. The Zincari commanders, many of whom had faced battles with other species, found themselves gripped by an unfamiliar fear. This was not just another warship. It was a weapon of cosmic destruction, and its existence defied everything they knew. We will show them the true power of the Zincari. Derricks spat, his voice laced with venom. We will crush them beneath our might. But before he could give the order to engage, something happened that sent a ripple through the Zincari fleet. The Vengeance fired, not at them, but into the heart of the system itself, sending a warning shot that resonated across the stars. The message was clear. Zincari fleet, this is Captain Elise Vega of the Terran Warship Vengeance. Her voice rang out across the comms, calm and unyielding. You have been warned. Leave the system now. Cease your hostilities. Your fleet is defeated, and your empire is crumbling. You are not the masters of the stars any longer. We are not here to conquer, but we will destroy anyone who threatens us. This is your final chance to retreat. The words were cold, precise, and final. There was no room for negotiation, no mercy. The Zincari had no choice but to listen, to feel the weight of that message deep in their bones. For the first time, they had to consider the possibility that the Terrans were not just another race to be crushed underfoot. The Terrans were a force, one that had taken down a fleet, humiliated an empire, and now commanded the full attention of the galaxy. For a long moment, the Zincari fleet stood frozen, as if the universe itself had paused in time. Derricks clenched his fists, his body trembling with rage. The humiliation was too much to bear. Order all ships to open fire. Derricks bellowed, his voice shaking with a mixture of fury and desperation. But before the order could be carried out, a second message came through. This one was not from the Vengeance, but from the Terran High Command. This is Admiral Marshal of the Terran Fleet. We are here, and we are not alone. Suddenly, from the depths of space, a fleet appeared. It was not just one warship, dozens of them, smaller, but no less formidable. Humanity had not only created the Vengeance, they had built an entire armada, each ship an extension of their defiance, their strength. The Zincari had only been the first to face humanity's wrath, and now the galaxy would know that humanity was no longer a race to be ignored. The Zincari fleet was no longer the aggressor. They were the prey. The battle that followed was swift. The Zincari, though powerful, were no match to the combined might of the Terran warships. The Vengeance tore through their ranks, its weapons a force of nature, its shields impenetrable. Every Zincari ship that tried to retaliate was crushed under the overwhelming force of humanity's resolve. Admiral Derricks, watching the carnage unfold before him, knew that there was no hope. The Zincari had lost, and now they would pay the price. When the battle was over, and the Zincari fleet was reduced to floating wreckage, Captain Vega addressed the remaining Zincari ships, those that had chosen to retreat rather than face total annihilation. This is your final warning, she said. Leave our space and never return. If you do, we will be waiting. The message was broadcast across the galaxy, not just to Zincari, but to every power that might consider challenging humanity. The Terrans had made their mark, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In the aftermath, the Zinkari, humbled and broken, withdrew to the fringes of the galaxy. Their empire would never recover from the blow humanity had dealt them. The once mighty conquerors had learned that in the face of the Terran Warship, their strength was meaningless. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as a vengeance and its fleet drifted away, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed the Terran rise. No longer were the Terrans seen as a primitive race. They were a power, one to be feared, one to be respected.